Mark had always prided himself on being able to handle the unknown. As a human ambassador for the Galactic Union, he traveled across star systems, met countless alien species, and faced situations that would send most people into a panic. But nothing could have prepared him for the first time he laid eyes on Zira. The day had started like any other. Mark was stationed on a peaceful research base near the edge of the Anon galaxy, tasked with translating ancient texts for a group of alien scholars. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it was safe, calm, and predictable. He liked it that way. He was happy in his little corner of space, far away from the chaos of political intrigue and intergalactic wars. But that morning, the quiet routine was shattered by an unexpected announcement. A new delegation from Ryler, a fierce warrior species, was arriving on the station for diplomatic talks. Mark had heard about the Rylarians, strong, proud, and nearly indestructible. They were known for their brutal battles and powerful physiques, but their leader Zira was another story. She was said to be a legendary figure, a warrior of unmatched skill and strength. No one could have guessed that the first time Mark would encounter her, it would be, well, like this. He was in the lounge, half listening to a conversation with a colleague, when the door slid open with a hiss. The air seemed to shift as she entered. Zira stood in the doorway, tall, commanding, and impossibly beautiful. Her skin shimmered in shades of blue and silver like stardust under a night sky. Her eyes were a piercing violet, glowing softly as she scanned the room, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Mark's breath caught in his throat. She was nothing like he expected. Her presence was magnetic, radiating power and confidence, yet there was something delicate about her too, a quiet strength that drew people in without words. He was immediately captivated, but he quickly realized his mouth had gone dry, his mind blank. Zira stepped forward with an easy grace that belied her intimidating size. She was a warrior, yet there was something so human about the way she moved. A brief smile tugged at the corner of her lips as her eyes found Mark. "You must be Mark," she said, her voice low and smooth, with a hint of amusement. "The human who's been translating our texts. I expected someone taller." Mark blinked, a bit caught off guard. Taller. I mean, I'm not exactly short," he trailed off, realizing how awkward he must have sounded. Zira chuckled, the sound like a melody that seemed to make the air hum with energy. "I was just teasing you, human." Her smile grew wider, revealing sharp teeth that were more stunning than intimidating. "You're the one everyone talks about, the curious human who thinks you can understand alien history. I'm intrigued." Mark quickly regained his composure, offering a nervous smile. "Well, I do try my best. It's kind of a hobby of mine, you know, learning about other cultures, and your people are fascinating." "Fascinating?" Zira's smile turned sly. "You think we're fascinating?" She stepped closer, towering over him slightly. "Tell me more." Mark's heart raced as she leaned in, her violet eyes gleaming with playful curiosity. He wasn't sure if she was teasing him, testing him, or genuinely interested, but it didn't matter. He couldn't take his eyes off her. His brain scrambled for words, but all he could manage was a lame, yeah. I mean, I've studied your people's traditions. You all are known for your strength, your fighting prowess." Zira raised an eyebrow. "Fighting prowess? Is that all we are to you, human, strong and fearsome?" Mark immediately realized how that might have sounded. No, that's not what I meant at all. I meant, well, I mean you're warriors, right? I've read all about your battles, your history. You're amazing." She took a step back, studying him with a serious gaze that made Mark nervous again. "You think I'm amazing, human?" Before he could respond, she smiled, wide and almost mischievous, her expression softening. "I'll take that as a compliment." Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Good," he muttered, his heart still racing. Zira's intense gaze hadn't let up, and he felt himself drawn into it like a moth to a flame. There was something about her, something that made him feel small and yet somehow strangely empowered. "So," she said, folding her arms over her chest, "I've been assigned as your security detail while I'm here. Seems your people trust you, Mark. So tell me, What do humans find fascinating about a warrior like me? Mark's mind raced as he struggled to come up with the right words. I think. I think humans like to see strength in others, he said carefully. But strength isn't just about fighting. It's about survival, resilience, and protecting what matters. Zira considered this for a moment, her eyes softening. You think we protect what matters? I do, Mark said, his voice more confident than he felt. It's what makes someone truly strong. Zira looked at him, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. Then she smiled again, this time more genuinely. Maybe you're right, human. Mark couldn't help but smile back. Maybe I am, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. And as they stood there, the unspoken understanding between them grew. Mark had no idea what this connection meant or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The days after Mark's first encounter with Zira passed in a blur of curiosity and quiet moments. Zira, the Relarian warrior, had become a steady presence in Mark's life. Her duties were clear: guarding, assisting in research, and offering her strength when needed. But the more time they spent together, the more Mark found himself drawn to her. She wasn't just the fierce warrior he had imagined. She was smart, playful, and surprisingly gentle in her own way. Mark couldn't help but notice how Zira's presence seemed to change the atmosphere around him. Every time she entered a room, it felt like everything shifted: her confidence, her strength, her quiet grace. It was like she carried an energy that couldn't be ignored, but what really captivated him was the way she made him feel. She didn't treat him like the human she had once looked down on. She treated him like an equal, and that was something Mark wasn't used to. It had been a week since that awkward but somehow endearing moment when Mark had accidentally called her his wife. Every time he thought about it, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but the more he replayed it in his head, the more he realized how light-hearted the moment had felt. And somehow, Zira seemed to like it. One afternoon, Mark found himself walking alongside her in the station's botanical garden. It was one of the few places on the station where he could escape the chaos of daily duties and just breathe. The sweet scent of alien flowers filled the air, and the soft rustle of plants created a calming backdrop. Zira was quiet today, walking beside him without speaking, but Mark didn't mind. There was a peacefulness in their silence, and he appreciated it. Zira suddenly stopped in front of a large tree-like plant with bright orange blossoms. She tilted her head, studying it closely. "This reminds me of the trees back on Ryler," she said quietly, her voice softer than usual. "The way the leaves shimmer in the sunlight, the way the wind moves through them. It's strange how something so small can bring so many memories." Mark paused, taking in the beauty of the tree. It was a gentle reminder of home for her, and it made him wonder about her past, about the battles she had fought and the life she had left behind. He took a step closer to her, speaking carefully. "I can't imagine what it must be like, being so far from everything you've known." Zira looked at him, her violet eyes meeting his, full of something Mark couldn't quite place. "You wouldn't understand," she said, but her voice wasn't cold. It was a soft, almost wistful tone. Mark felt a pang in his chest, wanting to say something to ease her pain, but he didn't know how. So instead, he did what he did best. He offered her a smile. "I can try." Zira's lips twitched upward at his attempt, and for a moment Mark felt like they were closer than they had been in weeks. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, something that had developed over shared moments and late-night conversations. It wasn't perfect, nothing was, but it was real, and that was enough for Mark. "I've never met anyone like you, human," Zira said, her voice quieter now, as though she was letting her guard down just a little. "You make me feel different, not like a weapon, not like a tool." Mark was caught off guard by her words, his heart skipping a beat. "You're more than just a weapon, Zira," he said, his voice sincere. "You've been through so much, but you're not defined by your past. You're so much more than that." Zira looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "You really believe that?" "I do," Mark said firmly. You're strong, yes, but you're also kind, smart, and capable of so much more than you realize. And you don't have to carry your past around with you. You're free now. You can decide who you want to be." She smiled softly, a warmth in her expression that made Mark's chest tighten. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time to stop carrying the weight of everything. Maybe I can finally let it go." Mark felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was more than that. There was something about Zira, something about her strength and vulnerability, that made him want to protect her, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to lean into the touch, her fingers gently curling around his. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Mark said, his voice softer now, as if the words were more real than ever. "But I want to be here with you, Zira. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes softened, her gaze never leaving his. "You're saying you want to stay with me?" she asked, her voice laced with both disbelief and hope. Mark nodded, his heart racing. "Yeah, I think that's exactly what I'm saying." Zira's expression shifted, and for the first time Mark saw something like relief in her eyes. "You know," she said, her smile returning, "I think I'd like that." The connection between them, once tentative and unsure, had solidified. They were two people from different worlds, from different lives, yet somehow they had found something in each other, something real. Mark smiled, his heart full, and they stood there for a while, hand in hand, watching the stars twinkle above them. The future was still uncertain, but with Zira by his side, Mark felt like he could face anything. The days had slipped into a comfortable routine. Mark and Zira spent most of their time together, working on research projects or wandering the corridors of the station. The atmosphere between them had shifted. What began as a simple professional relationship had deepened into something more. There was laughter now, and the kind of shared glances that made the air around them feel lighter. Mark noticed that he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed between them. Zira, for all her quiet strength, had become someone he could rely on. She had begun to let down her guard, just a little, allowing him to see the softer side of her. Today, they found themselves standing in the station's observation room. The massive glass window stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the galaxy. Stars glistened like diamonds against the dark backdrop of space, and a few nearby planets floated serenely in their orbits. Mark stood beside Zira, watching the view. She hadn't said anything for a while, but he could feel the tension in the air, as if something unspoken lingered between them. "You know," Mark began, breaking the silence, "sometimes I feel like I'm just drifting through space. You ever feel that way?" Zira turned her head slightly to look at him, her violet eyes piercing through the quiet. "You mean, lost?" she asked. Mark nodded, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Yeah, like I'm just here doing my job, but I don't really know where I'm going, or what I'm supposed to be doing." Zira's expression softened and she stepped closer, her wings folding neatly behind her. "I understand. I've lived that way for a long time, always moving forward, never really looking at where I was going, just surviving." Mark turned to face her. "Surviving isn't the same as living," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. "I know that now, but I think maybe it's time for both of us to stop just surviving." Zira met his gaze, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. There was something in the way she looked at him, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. It was like a door she'd kept closed for so long was beginning to creak open. Mark felt his heart race. There was something about her, something so real, so raw, that he couldn't help but want to protect her. "Do you ever regret it?" Zira asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Everything, the battles, the life I've lived. Do you ever regret not having the chance to live the life you imagined for yourself?" Mark was taken aback by the question. It wasn't what he'd expected to hear, but something in her voice made him stop and think. He stepped closer to her, his voice steady but soft. I don't think anyone ever truly gets the life they imagined, Zira. We all make choices. Some good, some bad, but we don't have to keep living in those choices. We can change. We can move forward. Zira looked at him, her expression still uncertain. And what if I don't know how to move forward? Mark smiled gently. Then maybe I can help. You don't have to do it alone. I've got your back. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just reached out, her hand brushing his, and Mark's breath caught in his chest. It wasn't an impulsive touch. It was deliberate, soft, almost hesitant. But it felt like a moment that mattered. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said softly, her eyes dropping to the floor. But I've spent so long hiding behind my walls, thinking that I could fight through everything on my own. I never thought I could rely on anyone. But with you, she trailed off, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark gently cupped her hand in his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. You don't have to rely on just yourself anymore. I'm here, Zira, and I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in a long while, Zira's expression softened completely. The hard, battle-worn exterior she had carried with her began to fade, replaced by something Mark had been longing to see: trust. It was a small shift, but it was enough for Mark to know that something had changed between them. The walls she'd built around herself were slowly crumbling, and he was part of the reason why. I don't know what happens next, Zira said, her voice steady but with a trace of vulnerability. But maybe, just maybe, I'd like to find out with you. Mark's heart surged at her words. It was the admission he hadn't known he needed to hear. And in that moment, everything felt like it was falling into place. They weren't just two people from different worlds anymore. They were partners, in a way neither of them had ever imagined. I think we can figure it out together, Mark said, his voice full of quiet conviction. One step at a time. Zira's eyes softened, and she smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since Mark had met her. It was a smile full of hope, a smile that made him feel like they were no longer just surviving, but actually living. Before either of them could say another word, Zira took a step closer, her wings brushing lightly against him as she placed a hand on his shoulder. The air between them seemed to hum with something new, something real. And before he could fully process what was happening, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't fast or rushed. It was slow, tentative, but it was perfect in its own quiet way. When they finally pulled apart, Mark couldn't help but smile. His chest felt light, his heart racing in a way that made him feel more alive than he had in years. We're really doing this, aren't we? He asked softly, still holding her gaze. Zira nodded, her smile matching his. Yeah, we are. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of ease. Mark and Zira had crossed an invisible line, a boundary between just sharing space and sharing something deeper. They spent their time exploring the station, talking about their hopes and fears, learning about each other's worlds, and more importantly, learning about each other. Mark found himself growing more comfortable with Zira, enjoying the quiet moments between them just as much as the times they laughed together. Zira, who had once been a stone-faced warrior, was starting to show sides of herself that Mark never imagined. Her dry humor, her curiosity about Earth, and the way she smiled so genuinely when she felt safe. Each new thing made Mark's heart beat faster. She wasn't just the warrior he had first met. She was becoming his Zira. One evening, after a long day of research, they sat together in the quiet of their shared quarters. The stars outside the station were brighter tonight, the silence between them more comfortable than ever. Mark couldn't help but steal glances at her as she worked on a holographic map of their surroundings, her fingers moving expertly across the controls. She had always been calm, but tonight there was something different. The tension that had once hung between them was gone. Earth, a strange place, Zira said, her voice breaking the silence. I've read about it in the databases, but nothing compares to hearing about it from you. Your oceans, your forests. It's so green. Mark chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Yeah, I guess it's a little different from the endless stars and barren planets out here, but it's home. Zira glanced at him, her violet eyes softening. And do you miss it, your home? Mark looked out the window for a moment, his thoughts drifting. I do, he said quietly. Sometimes, but I think what I miss most is the simplicity of it, the quiet moments, the feeling of belonging somewhere. But I guess, for now, this station is home. He met her gaze again, his heart skipping a beat. And with you here, I think it feels more like home than it did before. Zira didn't speak immediately. Her eyes lingered on him, a mixture of something unreadable and soft. She leaned forward, her wings folding slightly behind her, as if they, too, were beginning to relax. Maybe we both have a lot to learn about home, she said, her voice quieter now, filled with emotion. I've never had a place to truly call home. Not since. Mark could feel the heaviness in her words, the weight of the past that still haunted her. He didn't know the full extent of her history, of the battles she'd fought, the things she'd lost, but he knew that whatever it was, it had shaped her into the person she was today. And despite the fierce warrior she was on the outside, Mark could see the parts of her that longed for something more, a place of peace, a place of belonging. You don't have to carry that alone, Mark said softly, his voice steady. Not anymore. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Zira's gaze softened, and for a moment it was as if she allowed herself to believe that. Her walls, built up from years of survival and strength, seemed to lower just a little in his presence. She met his eyes, and for the first time she spoke with complete honesty. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. How to just be, not in constant battle, not with my fists raised. I don't know how to be anything other than that. Mark reached out, taking her hand gently in his. His thumb brushed across her skin, and he felt the warmth of her touch seep into him. You're more than just a warrior, Zira. You're kind and smart and stronger than anyone I've ever met. But you don't have to keep fighting all the time. You've got me, and I'll be here no matter what. Zira looked at their intertwined hands, her expression torn between the strength she had known for so long and the tenderness Mark was offering her. Slowly, she leaned closer, her wings shifting slightly as if adjusting to the new closeness between them. You're asking a lot, human, she said softly, her voice full of uncertainty but also hope. Asking me to believe in something I've never allowed myself to. Mark smiled, the corners of his lips curling up in a way that was both playful and serious. Yeah, I am, but I think you're stronger than you realize, Zira, and I think we can do this. Together. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze focused on their hands, her fingers slowly curling around his. Together, she repeated, almost like she was testing the word, seeing if it would fit. And when she looked up at him, there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of trust, of the possibility of hope, of something more. Mark didn't wait for her to say more. Instead, he leaned in, closing the distance between them, and kissed her gently. It wasn't a rushed kiss. It wasn't filled with desperation or urgency. It was slow, meaningful, as though they were both savoring the moment, realizing that it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. When they finally pulled away, Zira's expression was softer than Mark had ever seen it. Her smile was small but sincere, and there was a warmth in her eyes that made his heart swell. I never thought I could be this close to someone again, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Not after everything I've been through. Mark's thumb brushed against her cheek. You don't have to face it alone anymore. I'm here, Zira. I'll always be here. And in that moment, with her hand still in his and the stars twinkling above them, Mark realized that they weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Together. The days seemed to stretch longer now. Mark and Zira had fallen into a rhythm, one that felt surprisingly natural. There was an ease between them that hadn't existed before, and Mark couldn't help but notice how their conversations, once filled with awkward pauses and uncertainty, now flowed effortlessly. They'd spent the last few days discussing everything, his home on Earth, her experiences as a warrior, the endless stars they both now shared as their backdrop. Today, they were back in the station's botanical garden, a peaceful place with hanging vines and vibrant flowers, a stark contrast to the cold, metallic hallways of the station. The garden had become their quiet escape, a place where the world outside seemed to pause, and only the present mattered. Mark found himself glancing at Zira more than he intended to. Her presence had a calming effect on him. There was something about the way she walked, with grace and confidence, the faint shimmer of her blue skin glowing under the soft light of the station's artificial sun. He had to admit, Zira wasn't just strong and beautiful. She was someone he admired, someone he had grown to care for deeply. The thought made his heart race, but he quickly pushed it down. He didn't want to get ahead of himself, didn't want to complicate things. They were sitting on a bench, watching the gentle movement of the leaves and flowers swaying in the breeze. The silence between them was comfortable, but Mark felt a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken but heavy in his chest. He had to ask, had to understand where they stood. "Zira," Mark began, his voice a little hesitant, "I've been thinking." Zira turned to face him, her violet eyes meeting his with a curious glint. "Thinking about what human?" she asked, her voice playful but still serious. Mark took a deep breath. "About us, about where this is going." Zira tilted her head slightly, and for a brief moment Mark thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, concern, uncertainty, or was it just his imagination? "Where it's going," she echoed softly. "Yeah," he continued, trying to steady his nerves. "I mean, we've been spending a lot of time together and I don't want to assume anything, but I care about you, Zira, more than I thought I would." Zira looked away, her gaze lingering on the flowers before them. "I care about you too, human," she said quietly, "but I don't know how to do this. This relationship. My life has always been about survival, not this." She gestured between them, her fingers moving as if searching for the right words. Mark reached out, gently touching her hand. "I don't know either, but I think we're both figuring it out. We don't have to have all the answers right now." Zira turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. There was a warmth in her touch that made his chest tighten. She looked back at him, and for the first time in days her expression was soft, her defenses down. "You're right," she said, her voice softer than before. "Maybe we don't have to know everything. Maybe we just have to trust each other." Mark's heart fluttered at her words. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that until she said it. Trust. It was a word that felt heavy, yet comforting in the way she said it. Zira had been through so much. Her people had been at war. She had been a warrior for most of her life. And yet, here she was, showing him a side of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. "I trust you, Zira," Mark said, his voice steady. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You don't have to be anything you're not. I just want to be with you, if you want that too." Zira squeezed his hand, her gaze steady and sincere. "I want that too, Mark," she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I'm not used to this. I've spent so long fighting I forgot what it was like to live. I don't want to mess it up." Mark smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "I don't think you could mess it up if you tried," he teased, his voice light. "I'm in this for the long haul, whether you like it or not." Zira laughed, the sound light and infectious. "You're stubborn, human, I'll give you that." "And you're not as hard to get to know as you think," Mark replied, his grin widening. The moment of lightness between them felt like a turning point. There was no more hesitation, no more walls. Just two people, learning what it meant to trust and care for each other. Mark realized that this wasn't just a passing connection. He wanted to build something real with her. The air between them shifted again, and this time it wasn't filled with uncertainty. It was filled with promise. Mark reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Zira's eyes locked onto his, her gaze soft but intense. And then, without thinking twice, he leaned in and kissed her, slow and gentle, like a quiet promise. The world around them faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in that moment. Her lips were soft against his, and he felt a rush of warmth spread through him. It was simple, but it felt like everything. When they pulled away, Zira's smile was the most genuine Mark had ever seen. I think, I think I'm ready to figure this out with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark smiled, his heart full. I'm glad, because I wouldn't want to do this with anyone else. And as they sat there, hands still entwined, the stars above them shining brightly in the distance, Mark knew that whatever the future held, he wasn't facing it alone. The days that followed felt like a gentle unfolding of something neither Mark nor Zira could fully understand, but both were eager to explore. With every quiet conversation, every shared laugh, and every fleeting touch, they grew closer. Mark had always been independent, content with his life on the station, but there was something about Zira, something about the way she carried herself, her vulnerability hidden beneath layers of strength, that made him want to protect her, to be there for her in ways he never imagined. Zira, too, was beginning to let go of the walls she had built around herself. Her warrior instincts were still sharp, but the tenderness she had started to show Mark hinted at the softer side of her she had long buried. She had never allowed herself to trust anyone fully, but with Mark, there was something about him that made her feel safe. He wasn't afraid of her strength, nor did he expect her to be weak. He simply accepted her for who she was, and that made all the difference. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their quarters, watching the stars stretch out before them like a vast, endless sea, Mark broke the silence. The soft hum of the station filled the background, but all he could focus on was Zira, sitting next to him, her violet eyes reflecting the distant starlight. You know, I never thought I'd feel at home on this station, Mark said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. But, with you here it's different, it feels right. Zira glanced over at him, her lips curving slightly in a soft smile. I never thought I'd find myself feeling content either, not after everything. She paused, her gaze drifting to the stars. It's strange, I've fought so much in my life. I've always believed that was all I was good for, but now here, with you, it feels like I can breathe, like I don't have to fight anymore. Mark's heart swelled at her words. He had never seen Zira so open, so vulnerable, and it made him feel closer to her than ever before. You don't have to fight anymore, Zira, he said, his voice steady and sincere. Not with me. You don't have to prove anything. I'm here for you no matter what. Zira looked at him then, her expression softening, and for the first time she didn't look like a warrior. She looked like a woman, someone who had been through battles, yes, but who was also worthy of love, of peace, and of happiness. I don't know what I would have done without you, Mark, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You've made me believe there's more to life than fighting, that maybe I deserve a chance at happiness. Mark reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. You deserve everything, Zira. You're more than just a warrior. You're amazing, and I want to be a part of your life, all of it. Her eyes softened and a faint blush colored her cheeks. For a moment they simply sat there, the weight of their words hanging in the air, unspoken but understood. Then Zira slowly turned her hand over, her fingers intertwining with his. I've never been good at this, she said, her voice a little unsure. This, being vulnerable, letting someone in. Mark gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. You don't have to be perfect, Zira. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I just want you, all of you. She nodded slowly, her gaze holding his. I'm scared, she confessed, scared that what we have won't be enough, that I won't be enough. Mark's heart clenched at the vulnerability in her voice. He leaned in closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. Zira, you are more than enough. You're everything I've ever wanted, and I don't need anything more than what we have right now. We'll figure this out together. Her breath caught, and for a moment Mark thought she might pull away. But instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips pressing softly against his. It was a kiss filled with warmth, with hope, with everything they had yet to say. When they finally pulled away, Zira's eyes were filled with something new, a spark of belief, of possibility. Together, she repeated, her voice quiet but full of certainty. Mark smiled, his hand still gently holding hers. "Always," he said softly. The connection between them had deepened. The love they were beginning to build felt real and unshakable. Zira wasn't just the fierce warrior he had first met. She was someone who had been hurt, someone who had survived, but she was also someone who was learning to trust, to let go, and to embrace the possibility of a future, one that didn't revolve around battles or survival. They stood up together, their hands still intertwined, and walked toward the window, looking out at the stars again. This time, it wasn't just about the vastness of space. It was about the future they would face together, whatever came next. Mark knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They both had scars, both had pasts that shaped who they were. But as long as they had each other, he believed they could face anything. With Zira by his side, the stars didn't seem so far away. They felt like a promise of something new, something better.